Everyone in the room laughed when Daniel said no. It wasn't the kind of laugh meant to be cruel. It was worse. It was the laugh people give when they think the outcome is already obvious. The presentation had just ended. Analysts were celebrating. Investors were optimistic. Executives from some of the world's largest companies were making the same prediction. A single technology was about to reshape an entire industry. The winners had already been identified. The losers just didn't know it yet. And Daniel had just rejected the opportunity everyone else was chasing at first. Nobody understood why, because from the outside, his decision looked irrational. Imagine watching an entire crowd sprint toward a treasure chest while one person deliberately walks in the opposite direction. You don't assume they're smarter than everyone else. You assume they're making a mistake. That's exactly how Daniel looked. For years, he had built a reputation for making calculated decisions. He wasn't known for taking unnecessary risks. He wasn't known for dramatic predictions. He was known for being right, which made his latest move even more confusing. While competitors poured money into the same future, Daniel began investing in something nobody seemed excited about anymore. The headlines called him outdated. Industry experts called him cautious. Some investors called him dangerous. And every month that passed seemed to prove them right, because the world appeared to be moving exactly where everyone predicted. New companies exploded in popularity. Valuations climbed. Governments announced ambitious plans. Consumers embraced the trend faster than expected. Every signal pointed in one direction, except Daniel kept looking somewhere else. What nobody realized was that he wasn't ignoring the future. He was questioning a single assumption, hidden underneath it. An assumption so widely accepted that almost nobody bothered to challenge it. What if everyone was right about the destination but wrong about the journey? That question sounds small. It WASN single quotes, because once Daniel started exploring it, everything changed. Most people focused on where the industry would end up. Daniel became obsessed with what would happen in between. The transition, the messy middle, the part nobody puts on magazine covers, in conference presentations. The future always looked clean. Charts moved upward. Adoption curves accelerated. Technology improved. Problems disappeared. Reality, however, rarely follows presentation slides. Reality introduces delays, unexpected costs, human habits, infrastructure problems, political changes. Economic pressure. Reality asks questions that forecasts can't answer, and Daniel couldn't stop thinking about those questions at first. That obsession looked like fear. Even some people inside his own company wondered whether he was becoming too conservative. After all, what happens when every competitor is racing forward and you're standing still? You start looking foolish. The pressure became enormous. Customers asked questions. Investors demanded explanations. Journalists wrote skeptical articles. Every quarter brought fresh criticism, and still Daniel refused to change course, not because he believed everyone else was wrong, but because he believed certainty itself might be the real danger. That distinction mattered more than anyone understood. Because if the future unfolded exactly as predicted, Daniel would lose. His competitors would dominate. His strategy would fail. His reputation would disappear. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and yet he stayed committed. Then something interesting happened. Nothing dramatic, no collapse, no scandal, no shocking headline, just tiny inconveniences. Small problems, the kind people usually ignore. A project took longer than expected, a budget increased unexpectedly. A promised rollout slowed down, customers encountered situations nobody talked about during product launches. Individually, none of these issues mattered. Collectively, they started creating doubt. Not enough to change the market, just enough to create questions. And questions are dangerous, because once people begin asking questions, they start looking for answers. Consumers who had been focused on excitement began focusing on practicality. Businesses started calculating costs more carefully. Families started comparing expectations against reality. The conversation slowly changed. And this is where Daniel's strange decision started becoming important. Years earlier, while everyone else chased the most exciting breakthrough, he had invested in something painfully boring: efficiency. Not glamorous efficiency, not marketing-friendly efficiency, real-world efficiency. The kind that saves money, the kind that reduces headaches, the kind people rarely celebrate but deeply appreciate. His engineers spent years improving systems that nobody would ever brag about at dinner parties. They weren't trying to build products people admired. They were trying to build products people trusted. At the time, that strategy looked uninspiring. Trust doesn't generate viral headlines. Reliability doesn't dominate social media. Predictability isn't exciting until people need it, and suddenly those boring qualities started becoming valuable. Very valuable because, as the market matured, buyers became less interested in making statements. They became more interested in solving problems. The shift happened gradually, almost invisibly, one customer at a time, one business decision at a time, one purchasing choice at a time. And Daniel noticed something fascinating. The people who actually used the products every day weren't always making decisions for the reasons experts predicted. They weren't chasing ideology. They weren't chasing trends. They were chasing convenience, affordability, dependability, confidence, the ability to wake up tomorrow and know everything would work. That realization reinforced what he had suspected all along. The future wasn't a technology competition. It was a human behavior competition. And human behavior has always been harder to predict than technology, because people don't live inside forecasts. They live inside real life. Different countries develop differently. Different communities face different constraints. Different families solve different problems. A solution that feels perfect in one place can feel completely impractical somewhere else. Daniel built his entire strategy around that. Complexity. Most competitors built theirs around certainty. For a long time, certainty looked smarter than complexity started catching up. Not enough to declare winners, not enough to declare losers, but enough to expose something important. The future was becoming far less predictable than anyone expected, and suddenly, Daniel no longer looked like the man standing still. He looked like someone who had spent years preparing for possibilities other people never considered. That's when observers began revisiting the decision. They once mocked, not because it had been fully proven right, it hadn't. Not because the alternative had failed. It hadn't, but because the debate itself had changed. The question was no longer which technology would win. The question was whether any single technology could solve every problem, and those are very different. Conversations.one assumes certainty. The other assumes reality. Years after everyone laughed, Daniel found himself in another conference room. Different audience, different mood this time. People weren't asking whether he had fallen behind. They were asking why he had remained patient when everyone else rushed ahead. He paused before answering. Then he said something surprisingly simple. The future isn't difficult because nobody can see it. The room went silent. It's difficult because there are always several versions of it. And maybe that's the part most industries forget. The greatest risk isn't choosing the wrong answer. It's believing there's only one answer available, because history is filled with companies that accurately predicted tomorrow and still failed. Not because they misunderstood the future, but because they underestimated how many ways it could arrive, which leaves a question that still hasn't been answered. When the next transformation comes, and it always does, will success belong to the people who correctly predict what's coming, or to the people who prepare for outcomes? Nobody else is willing. To imagine that question becomes even more unsettling when you realize how often history rewards the second group, because the people who appear slow in one decade sometimes become the survivors in the next, and the reason usually has nothing to do with intelligence. It has everything to do with patience. Most industries move through the same cycle. A breakthrough appears, excitement spreads, money follows. Predictions become bolder. Anyone expressing doubt gets labeled a pessimist. Then, quietly, reality arrives. Not to destroy the breakthrough, not to prove everyone wrong, simply to introduce complications. Complications are rarely dramatic. They don't arrive with warning sirens. They arrive through millions of ordinary decisions. A customer choosing affordability over innovation, a business choosing reliability over ambition, a government delaying a project, a family deciding convenience matters more than features. One decision means nothing. Millions of them can reshape an entire market. Daniel understood this because he spent years studying something most executives ignored, not products, people. Every report crossing, His desk eventually pointed back to the same truth. Consumers almost never behave exactly the way experts expect. They adapt, they compromise, they prioritize, and most importantly, they change their minds. That's why predictions become dangerous. The more certain a prediction sounds, the more fragile it often becomes, because certainty leaves no room for surprises. Flexibility does. This became obvious during one internal meeting that almost nobody remembers today. There were no cameras, no journalists, no investors.